Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May meeting of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to have another incredible program. We have a nice panel to share some of their thoughts on this really interesting, fascinating online exhibition that has been prepared by Sonia Mak. But first, I need to take care of a housekeeping item here. We do have an opportunity you do have an opportunity to ask questions through the chat. They will only be seen by our host handler, and she will be sending those to me. So there is no outside discussion. Unfortunately, that's something that we do miss with some of our monthly meetings. It's really always a great opportunity for us to chat and share, and that human contact is something that we have really missed over the past year. But still, I'll be able to see your names, and hopefully you'll be able to ask questions, and I'll be able to share. We'll have a sort of a virtual discussion back and forth. In the meantime, I do want to let you know that this program will be recorded, and it will be available on the Chinese Historical Society's YouTube channel. So all you have to do, actually, not only for this program, but for all of our past programs, or at least for the past year, you'll be able to see them on the CHSSC YouTube channel. So if you have any problems, I think you just go to our website, chssc.org, and you'll see directions and information. There are a lot of things happening in Chinatown. There are a lot of things that are ongoing. The community seems to be going well. I'm in Chinatown almost every day, and I see many people out on the street shopping, going to restaurants, going to the bakery. Doctors' offices are open. The Chinatown Service Center is just filled with people attending, participating in various activities, in various programs. So, and school will be opening pretty soon. So hopefully we'll be getting back to normal or near normal very soon. So today we have, I do want to share with you that today's program will be a panel that will be actually include the curator of the online exhibition that has been prepared for the Chinese Historical Society, and it's a project of Sonia Mak and her husband Shervin to really share an interesting part of LA Chinatown's history. And to really lead off, I would like to introduce Sonia Mak. She is a curator, and she has been a curator for a number of museums. The first curator at the Chinese American Museum, and she has been not only a curator, but a writer and an arts administrator. She's worked at places like the LA County Museum of Art, the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, the Morono Kiang Gallery, the Craft Contemporary, and the Vincent Price Art Museum. And presently, she serves as advancement officer at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. Her background is in art history. She received a BA from San Francisco State University and an MA from the University of California at Riverside. So we have a very experienced curator who really came to us with a project, and we, the Chinese Historical Society, openly welcome such an interesting combination of topics to study, and that is Tyrus Wong and Y.C. Hong, the first Chinese American lawyer in Los Angeles. So what I'd like to do now is introduce to you Sonia Mak, and she will tell you a little bit about the project that she has been preparing for us. Sonia?
Much, Jean, for the introduction. I want to first start by giving my heartfelt thanks to the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California for inviting me to do this project, to do a project, to propose my own project, and also to the Louis Family Foundation for generously supporting this online exhibition. Um, there are a few people I want to thank. Richard Liu, who kindly shared his time and his buildings with us so that we could realize this project. Nolan Hong, the son of Y.C. Hong, and Kim Wong, who is the youngest daughter of Tyrus Wong, both of whom helped us in realizing this project. There are other people that were also instrumental in making this exhibition possible, and I've thanked them on our website. I also want to thank our special guests who are joining us today, Kristina Wong and George Yin, who I will introduce to you at length a little bit later. For the time being, what I would like to do is to start off just by giving you a quick glimpse of the virtual tour. And how's my volume, guys?
Yeah, you need to speak up.
Good.
You need to go up. Speak up.
I've got to draw on my Cantonese.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen right now and we'll pop our heads into the virtual tour. Okay. Okay, so everyone, we are on the Art Salon Chinatown website, and there's a little entrance window on the front page, and you'll see this exhibit page, which has all of the text that I've written about, well, some of the text that I've written about the exhibition. Here's the painting here on the right side. And there's a window here to enter the virtual 3D exhibition. So I'm just going to click on this arrow and we can take a quick look around. This is the office of Y.C. Hong. And this is the painting that Tyrus Wong produced on commission for Y.C. in 1938 called Confucius as a Justice. And actually, Honor Easton, who designed this office for YC, she added, take a quick look around, the bookshelves. You see the little targets on the bookshelves here. If you hover over those targets, a label will pop up. Okay. These little spots on the floor are vantage points. You can click onto one and you'll take a step in that direction. Okay. So just a quick primer on how to navigate around the room. And let's go over to the painting. See him right there. You can click on the tag and you can see the painting up close. And here is a label about the painting. It's the beginning of the exhibition, and to read the full exhibit text, you click on the link right here, and that will take you to the page that is slowly loading that has all of the text about the exhibition that I wrote. Not just about the piece, but about Tyrus, about YC, about the changing, about the transition from old Chinatown to new Chinatown. And what was so important about the late 1930s here in Los Angeles in the Chinese American community, and why this painting means more than just opaque watercolor on board hanging in an office. And so I'll tell you, for those of you who don't know anything about Tyrus Wong, nor YC Hong, I'll tell you a little bit about them. Um, Tyrus, Tyrus was born in China in 1910, and he left China as a 9-year-old, and he was never able to go back. He came into the US at Angel Island. He lived in Sacramento for a short time, moved to Los Angeles, lived in Old Chinatown, studied at Otis Art Institute on scholarship, was, sorry, let me go back. Studied at Otis on scholarship, was able to graduate with distinction, and he was able to find a job as a lead concept artist on Bambi, and spent a great many years of his career working at Warner Brothers. After that, he had a very long retirement and built and designed his own kites. YC Hong was a little bit older. Maybe I should stop sharing my screen. Sorry about that. YC was a little bit older. He was born in 1989. And he, not long after high school, he actually was working as a court interpreter for US Immigration Services. And he did that for quite some time. And in 1923, he actually passed the California State Bar. And he was the second person of Chinese descent to do that in the state of California. It was the year following 1924 and the year after that that he earned his LLB and LLM respectively at USC, and he was the first Chinese student at USC to graduate with those degrees. By the late 1920s, he had established his own immigration law practice in Old Chinatown, and in so doing, really also found many opportunities to become a leader in the early Chinatown community. And it turns out the community was ready for such leadership. And in the early 1930s, which is really where the story of Old Chinatown transitions to New Chinatown. In the early 1930s, the city leaders of Los Angeles started waves of evictions in order to make way for the Union Station railway terminal. And so, since they were using eminent domain, the residents and business owners of Old Chinatown, all of whom were renters, they actually had no legal recourse to protect themselves. And they were essentially running out of space to live and work. So Peter Su Hu Sr., who was the first Chinese engineer at the city's Department of Water and Power, was able to really gather business interests and merchants in Old Chinatown and get everybody together to form an association. Well, YC Hong was an advisor to this association, the Los Angeles Chinatown Project Association, and he advised that being well-versed in the laws of the city-state and the country, that while the California Alien Land Law prohibited people of Chinese descent to purchase property, that this association of individuals, albeit Chinese, could actually form a corporation, and by doing so would have the legal right as a business entity to purchase property. And so that's what they did. And so in the face of adversity and what may have seemed at the time to be an insurmountable challenge, YC lent his knowledge of the law to the situation and offered a solution. And the solution ended up being a successful experiment, an urban development that became the first Chinatown in the United States that was self-financed, designed to the cultural and pragmatic specifications of the early Chinese American community in Los Angeles. So it was a huge feat. Although it's little known, I think the history of this feat is little known in Los Angeles and elsewhere as modern history. But this is just a little bit of background for the exhibition, and what I would like to do now is to introduce our guests, Kristina Wong and George Yin.
Hi, everyone.
So I'm going to read little bios about Kristina and George. Kristina Wong is a performance artist, comedian, writer, and elected representative of Koreatown, Los Angeles, whose work has been recognized through many grants, including Creative Capital, the City of Los Angeles Master Artist Fellowship from the Department of Cultural Affairs, and 8 Los Angeles Artist in Residence Awards. Her long-running show, Wong Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, looked at the high rates of depression and suicide among Asian American women and is now a concert film. Her recent piece, Kristina Wong for Public Office, is a simultaneous real-life stint as the elected representative in Koreatown, Los Angeles, and campaign rally show. During the pandemic, she founded the Anti-Sewing Squad, a collective of volunteers sewing face masks for vulnerable communities. So joining us is George Yin. He is an attorney, arts advocate, and board member of the Vincent Price Art Museum Foundation. As an attorney with Kaufman Legal Group, he advises candidates, elected officials, political committees, ballot measure committees, nonprofit organizations, and public agencies on local, state, and federal laws. He has over a decade of experience representing public agencies in public, municipal, education, water, and administrative law. He has served on the boards of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California, the Organization of Chinese Americans Greater LA Chapter, the Asian Professional Exchange, and the Pacific Asian Museum Chinese Arts Council. He holds a JD from UCLA Law School, an MA in Urban Planning from the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, an MSc in Public Administration and Public Policy from the London School of Economics, and a BA in Government from Cornell University. George has enough degrees for all of us on the panel.
Like,
I had no
cool.
idea how many degrees you had, George. And he's
Yeah,
at
so
like
they're all-
every art event. Every art event, he's there too.
And what I wanted to say before we get started talking is just to thank you both for joining us today in this conversation. You know, I thought it really apropos, being that this exhibition is about an artist and a lawyer, to have an artist and a lawyer on this panel with me. And you know, the reason why, there are a couple of reasons why I chose Kristina and George. I've known each of them for almost 20 years apiece. So I trust them. We've all been very active in the Asian American community for a long time. And I wanted to have an honest conversation. You know, when the Historical Society approached me about this opportunity, it was late October, early November, and a lot has, I feel like everything in the world has changed since early November. The world is a very different place already. And so I thought that while working on this exhibition, I kept thinking about the difficulties that the early Chinese American community faced in the 1930s, and I saw a lot of parallels and um, was able to find a lot of inspiration in working on this project during this time. But I also thought it would be great to have a conversation about maybe how the present is in some way echoing the past.
Yeah, let's do it.
So
Yes.
since you're all together, why don't we talk about the title of the exhibit? What's inspired that? And maybe we can talk about the part of the title. Each one of the panelists could talk about it.
You know, when I was working on the exhibition, well, when I first decided to choose this artwork as the topic of the exhibition, I didn't know what I would find because I've never researched this artwork before, and virtually nothing is written about it, and it's never been exhibited. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to leverage our relationship with Richard Liu, the owner of the Hong buildings, the 3 Hong buildings. That's 445 Jinling Way, 425 Jinling Way, and 951 North Broadway. To use that relationship to, I'm sorry, I'm speaking too softly, everybody. I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to learn a little bit more about Tyrus, an artist who I've worked with, who I knew personally, and had the pleasure to curate on a number of occasions. But you know, I realized that as soon as I started doing the research, talking to his family, and also thinking about the time period in which the work was made, that it soon became a many-layered onion. And that's part of why the title sounds so grand for an online exhibition. And in part because I was thinking about the things that have been happening recently, and I've been ruminating on what justice might mean. Um, I apologize about that. I've been ruminating a lot on what justice might mean and what that might look like, because it's something that we're still grasping at. It's something we're still struggling to achieve. So, and the, you know, another reason why I asked George and Christina to be part of this conversation is because they've also been working for justice in their own vocations as well.
Also, George is a lawyer and I'm an artist. So it's this parallel where 100 years from now, someone will be writing about the doodle that I put on a Post-it note that was in George's office that somehow symbolizes this.
I have it framed already. It's ready. It's ready for
This
a
doodle I
curator.
haven't made. Okay. But what I appreciate about this, and I was not familiar, I've never been inside, I've only been in Realm, you know, which was the gift store, now empty space, soon to be the space for Art Salon, right? The Chinatown, the gallery downstairs. And when you described to me that there's this painting, I had imagined it was going to be in this dark corridor, and I had no idea that the office had been restored like that, and it's actually embedded in the wall, so it's impossible, right, to remove without possibly damaging it. But that the whole history of New Chinatown can be viewed through the lens of this piece there, and the fact that it's in this building, that it's in that YC is who he is and Tyrus is who he is, and that building was purchased because Chinese people could not buy property, and they had to, corporations, which is not too different than now, seem to have more rights sometimes than individuals, right? And so Chinese people had to form a corporation to buy these buildings and to work around that. And these are some lessons that we're thinking about now with anti-Asian violence, which is for a lot of East Asian people very new. I think for people of my parents' generation and older, they witnessed this, they just sort of learned to live with it. But it's become very clear that our complicity, our silence, our success is not going to save us. So what will be? And it is kind of thinking strategically, what does a coalition look like? And when I read about this building and how it was purchased, and this painting that is so Chinese, right, in an American law building that presents Confucius as a justice, I feel like that's a sort of subversive nod, like, hey, we're still Chinese. And then we already, while we are in this system fighting for justice, there are systems from history and our heritage that inform us as we move forward. So I think that there's a lot to look at in terms of how people organized in the past, as we kind of think forward about how are we going to move through this moment in our history. Are we going to come together? Are we just going to fight each other? I mean, now we have things like Twitter, and so it's different than coming together. But how are we? What are these moments and this visual culture that we're going to create that that makes an impact, a stance, but also does something very palpable, like property, like a place where people can go to see an immigration attorney when there's only 2 available.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, I've actually, the first time I saw YC Hong's office was, Eugene Moy took me and a group of other people who are on a Chinatown walking tour, and he's done a few of these with me. And I saw the office, and I mean, first of all, I've always loved Chinatown Central Plaza. I mean, it's just an amazing space. It's beautiful. It's from another time, but it's also timeless, and it has ancient and modern features, and it's fun, and it's, I've always loved it. But going into YC Hong's office, I mean, it is a grand affair. I don't know if anybody has done it, but you walk up this grand staircase, beautifully oak, wood paneled, and you look at the kind of Art Deco flourishes and his name on the door and kind of Art Deco lettering, and his beautiful office. It's just an incredibly stylish and cool office. And I just thought, man, this guy was, man, he was something. He had some style. And then I learned more about him. And one thing I discovered about him, and many of you know, and some of you don't, is and one thing that was a little bit left out of Sonia's story about YC was when he was a child, his uncle was playing with him and threw him up in the air and dropped him, and caused spine damage and back damage to YC, and which resulted him not growing beyond, I believe it was like 4 foot. What was it, Gene? What was it? 4'6". So here's a man who obviously suffered from a disability, but at the same time, he was a lion and a pillar of the community, and became such. First of all, proving his mother wrong. His mother thought he never would amount to much in the world. He totally proved that wrong. And he became a leader, helped found New Chinatown. He interacted with presidents, with senators, he really helped put Chinatown and the Chinese American community on a positive footing. But at the same time, dealing with his own personal disabilities, and also dealing with rampant racism, just symbolized by the fact that the entire Chinese American community was cleared out to build a train station, but him and a group of people brought people back. But one thing I didn't clue in until Sonia really brought it to fore, and this historical society brought it to fore, is this painting. And I can only think, and maybe there might be documents as to how this painting got there, what inspired it. But in the absence of that, I think that he must have had that painting up there in part just to inspire him every day. Inspire him that he, even though he's living in a racist society, that he comes from a proud and ancient tradition of civilization, of one of culture and learning. But also, I think in many ways that that Confucianism, which is obviously one of the leading philosophies in the Chinese tradition, probably inspired him, because he led in many ways a very Confucian life. Like there's a certain kind of way of being that Confucianism advocates for the individual. And I think YC and maybe we can talk about some of those aspects, but YC, I think, really just symbolized every, embodied every one of those. I mean, he was in many ways the ideal Confucian, what in Mandarin is called Junzi, which is the kind of person often translated as gentleman or authoritative person who embodies the values of Confucianism. And we can maybe talk about that, but I think YC did that. And then at the same time, you had Tyrus, who also, I could only imagine the amount of discrimination and racism that he faced, yet he persevered and through art, made wonderful films for Disney and other and for Hollywood. But the work that he did, for example, on Bambi was so beautiful, and inspired by Chinese painting traditions. But another central aspect of Confucianism is that in addition to learning and compassion and humanity and installing kind of like a moral social order, was very, very, felt that art was integral to the cultivation of the person. And I think the fact that you had Tyrus and YC together as friends and then working together on this project and putting this wonderful painting in YC's office really is symbolic of the melding of those ideas. So yeah, I thought it was it's a wonderful project, and I hope lots of people get to see it, both online and hopefully in person later on.
Yeah. I should mention, by the way, that all of you who are watching this at home and are capable of multitasking, you can also go into the Art Salon Chinatown site, Art Salon Chinatown, all run together, .com, and you can take a look at the Confucius as Justice virtual exhibition, which is, by the way, sponsored by one of our generous community supporters, the Louis Family Foundation. I should not omit that, their support for this. But there's also a little bit about the art and law versus law angle that we can look at. I understand, Sonia, that YC Hong had dignitaries, important elected officials in his office. And while in the office, this painting of Confucius was basically looking at them. Can you comment on that?
Well, for me, like I said, for me, it's easy to think about the painting as being at the center of many concentric circles that piece together in lots of different angles. And so when I think about the office, yes, I think about all the people that came there, and I think about who are the people that painting looked upon. The people that went to YC's office were people who were in a vulnerable position. They were going to him for help. They didn't know if they would be able to unify their families. They were hoping that he could find a way for them to take one step closer to the American dream and to have their families reunited. But at the same time, not only is it a space that people walk into, it's also a space that was created and designed. And so one of the other things that came to me in thinking about this exhibition was, who were the people that put this space together? Who were the minds that came up with this space? And so the first people who come to mind are the architects Earl Webster and Adrian Wilson, who designed the 3 Hong buildings, but they were also the architects who designed the master plan for all of New Chinatown. So, and the folks at the Historical Society might think of those names as being household names, but we don't necessarily think of those architects as being California modernists, and in fact they were. So, so YC and the Los Angeles Chinatown Project Association hired a group of California modernist architects to design New Chinatown, and Mabel Hong, YC's wife, shared with them a collection of rare books published in Germany about ancient Chinese architecture. And so these California modernist architects were studying books published in Germany about ancient Chinese architecture in order to create the first Chinatown community development project, which is unthinkable. All of this is happening. I mean, maybe it doesn't sound so unthinkable, but if you bear in mind the fact that this is all happening under the shadow of Chinese exclusion, Chinese immigration was illegal except for students and business people. And so, and again, Chinese couldn't buy property, they couldn't testify in court against a white person, they couldn't vote, they couldn't become naturalized citizens. This is a pretty hostile environment in which these California modernists are studying ancient Chinese architecture and being hired by a group of early Chinatown business interests to design the first Chinatown that was ever self-funded, you know? So
Self-funded, and it was owned by Chinese.
exactly. And
That's
so
important.
built into the genetics of this project is the idea that no one can evict us ever again, which I think so potent a notion, and a potent one, especially given that it was 1937 when they bought the railway storage yard, and a year later celebrated its opening. So it's really a very, for me, deeply inspiring to think about the struggles that the early community faced, and YC's role in it, what this painting, how this painting really radiates with meaning about that moment in time.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could build on something that Sonia was saying, and she evoked the idea of the concentric circles, kind of, what how this office and this painting have touched many, but also I was reflecting on the idea of why the name for the painting Confucius as a justice, and what was the notion of justice that was being thought of. And I thought, well, I don't know how much people know about Confucianism. There was a time when I was younger when I was looking for a lot of kind of guidance and meaning on terms of how I would proceed in my life. And some people turn to self-help and self-help books and so forth. For me, part of my exploration was looking at my ancestral traditions, including Confucianism, Taoism, and other philosophical traditions. And Confucianism really resonated with me, and I think it probably resonated with Tyrus and with YC, because in particular YC, because I think he was a very Confucian person in many ways. Because in a way, like, I'll just frame it like this. So in Western society, a lot of times the way Western pluralistic democracy is supposed to function is that if you imagine like each person is like a stick, all right, bear with me, a stick. And then you band together with other sticks. So you create a handful of sticks of like-minded individuals or similar, people with similar interests. And then you can build more and become a big bundle of sticks, right? And then you kind of weigh which bundle has more sticks, and then the one with the greater weight, that's the one that wins. Well, back in the day, it certainly wasn't the Chinese who were the big bundle, right? But if that's the way you think of things, then the Chinese community or the Chinese individual in that society is not going to amount to much, right? But the Confucian way is a little bit different. It's more like Sonia was saying, is in terms of radiating circles, concentric circles. You can imagine the individual as a pebble or a stone, and you throw it into a lake or a pond, and it results in ripples, right? And the ripples are symbolic of the impact that the individual can have on successive layers of society. Like, first there's the cultivation of the individual through art and reading and learning and developing your moral compass. and then it's your family, rectifying your family, and then once you get your family together, then you improve your community, and then you improve your state and your society, and then it's like, you know, like ripples in a pond. And I think in many ways, here you have YC Hong and Tyrus, who, you know, Chinese American individuals, you know, just a little pebble, but boy, did they make a big impact when their pebble dropped into the pond. And I think we're still seeing that today. I mean, their legacy of what they built, you know, through, I think the fact that this painting was in YC's office is a continual reminder to him to live up to that ideal of building trust, of having compassion, of being humane. These are all the central ideas of how to cultivate an individual, and of course, support for the arts, which he clearly had. And those, once you get all that together, then you can start making impact into the world. And I think it's beautiful that we still have this to see, and also to symbolize what these people went through.
This is so gorgeous. I hope my tone of my voice is always so naturally sarcastic, but I'm being real sincere when I make the suggestion. Like when I'm in Chinatown and I see all these tourists doing their like Instagram photo by that building and their diet tea, whatever thing. I'm like, I wish there was a way we could just tuck into every comment section. Did you realize that the building that you're in front of exists because Chinese couldn't buy property? Like we could take them through all this history. Like it's right in front of us. And I think so many people just sort of experience it as aesthetics and, oh, look, that's the closest they'll know of what China is. And yet there's this whole bigger, it is there, that community is there because of injustice. It wasn't because Chinese people were cliquey or or whatever, you know, whatever crazy reasons I've heard for why Chinatown exists. And yeah, I'm just sort of echoing that this is so rich and so deep, and that it is this prism, right? That you can see this whole history, and I've learned so much just from the moment that I was invited to this panel and had to look into it, and now I'm like constantly thinking like, well, how does this inform what we're doing now? And I think there are a lot of lessons, and there is a moment where where right now we are in this crisis point, right? We can buy property, some of us have six-figure jobs, maybe like George, but you know, we have these things, but what we don't have is certain safety, and we're still not completely human enough that we can, you know, feel safe walking around the street, or feel that our families or elders are safe, and where are the solutions there? And so these are things I've been ruminating on, and a lot of it is like, well, what is that modern coalition? What is that modern version of forming a corporation so that we have power? Is it looking at our community-based organizations? And we had this conversation, George, it's that there are some community-based organizations that formed after the LA uprisings that I live here in Koreatown, where I'm also an elected rep, and I'm seeing that those organizations that really came together then are not as they're not as radical as as other grassroots efforts to kind of organize the neighborhood and really think about racial justice. Yeah.
I want to share with you all, by the way, too. This is kind of a family discussion here. We have
oh, sorry, Gene. Did
we
I
have
say
we have no. I just want to share with you that we have many friends among us. We have all three of Tyrus's daughters on listening.
Hello.
We have
yes, I saw Kim.
Nolan Hong, son of YC Hong, is on, and you know, we have many family members who or acquaintances who benefit from him. I can share with everyone out here that when my dad came to LA in the 1930s from Omaha and Montana before that, but he didn't have a social security card, even though he was a US citizen. But YC Hong's files over at the Huntington Library contained a social security card for my dad, which I didn't know. You know, it never existed, didn't know it had existed, you know, unless except for the fact that he was preserved at the Huntington. So YC left this huge legacy of helping people. He obviously was out there to support the Chinese and the Chinese American community, and was a courageous person who, even if one were, he didn't let his height or size, be an impairment. He spoke before Congress. I think you mentioned that already, George, that he went to Congress, spoke with political leaders. He was fearless. And I think that painting seemed to me, and I'm talking too much here, but was an inspiration for YC to continue with the work that he was doing for people. Um, what what I what we could do is maybe just talk a little bit about the art. Since you're Christina, what you mentioned, how you feel about being in Chinatown and art, but have you ever looked up at the also outside the YC Hong had three buildings, and one of the one at the corner had a mural of a scene, a dragon uh, up in the sky, similar to his movie work. So what do you?
Tyrus did that one.
Yes.
The dragon.
Yeah.
The only building I've been in is what Realm was.
Okay.
And I've only been able to see things from the outside. Richard doesn't let me inside. No one lets me inside. I don't know. I beg to use a restroom. No one lets me inside.
Yeah.
We'll go with Eugene one of these days, because he knows hasn't been to anything, any building in China.
No, we really owe a lot to the owner of the buildings, Richard Liu. There was a question in the chat from Chris Kwok, who is in New York, by the way. We have many friends online, by the way. I should mention some from out of state, and I'll comment on that in a moment. But yeah, the buildings were sold to Richard. He had a sensitivity for art and architecture, and he basically made a commitment to preserve that office upstairs on the second floor of the largest building. So that office is basically intact. And as you saw from the images that Sonia showed, uh, the, uh, the furniture is there, the bookcases with the law books are there.
Great shape.
Yeah.
It's in great shape. I think Richard was very much invested in preserving. He was very much interested in the historic fidelity of the space, all the way down to the fixtures, the wavy glass, all of it. He did reupholster the chairs because they're pretty worn, but it's really, I mean, it's been a treat to learn about that office and about the making of Chinatown as a result of this project. Of course, I was familiar with the history earlier, but it was wonderful to study a bit more about the architecture and the design. It was actually, I mentioned the architects Webster and Wilson earlier, but I did also want to say that it was the wife of Earl Webster, interior designer Honor Easton, who designed YC's office. All of the colors, the materials, she was responsible for it. And she designed his desk as well, with his Chinese name emblazoned on the front. And she was good friends with Mabel, YC's wife. I haven't yet figured out if it was her friendship with Honor that got Webster and Wilson to come over and do the work for the Chinatown Corporation, or if they became friends afterwards. But I'm very interested in learning more about that story. And I think that, one of the things that I was interested by was that YC and Mabel hired Tyrus to do this painting because they thought that he was avant-garde. He was very young at the time. 1938 was the year that he'd landed his job at Disney. So his career hadn't taken off yet. He was
Wow.
still very early on in his career, you know. It was a historic year, 1938.
Yeah, like Bambi was a few years later, right?
Yeah, that was 1942. So, you know, it was that the moment that this painting was produced was for me a very um, meaningful and pregnant moment. There were many odds, but there were also many opportunities, and this painting kind of cinches all of those um, tensions together for me um, in a really neat package, I guess you could say. So it's been a wonderful journey learning about this particular painting. It's never been exhibited before. It's never left the wall. So it's been a treat to research it and share it with all of you. And I think, Jean, now there are 8 minutes left in the hour. Maybe it would be a good time.
I'm watching the clock too, but I see a very interesting question
Okay.
from Viet Lee for the panelists. What does justice look like for you in the age of BLM and Stop Asian Hate? What strategies, historic or contemporary, have been resonant for you while working for justice in the communities that you care about? So
I just did a project with formerly incarcerated Asian Pacific Islanders, the East-West Players, and it's a whole community that we don't even think is impacted by criminal justice system. But the participants in this workshop were collectively had spent 100 years inside prison, and there were a couple people who still have family members who are in the inside, and it's a very small minority in the prison. Sometimes they're not. It's hard to count how many Asian Americans there are in prison because they're often just counted as other. It's hard for inmates to get those who are incarcerated to get translation. We had a woman who was incarcerated, and she was describing how there were all these women, older women, who were there because they took the case for their husbands and sons, which means that, like, whatever had happened, the police came and they said, I did it, even though they didn't do it. And just hearing so many stories about, like, you know, we describe about like stuff in the aftermath of, like, I hope so and so finally gets justice and so gets locked up. And the unfortunate thing around that kind of justice is that it relates, it depends. I'm sorry, my language, tongue, long day. But that sort of justice only plays out after the crime has been committed, after everyone has been hurt, right? And I'm sort of, and a lot of the folks who were in our workshop were locked up when they were like 16 and 17 years old, and 3 strikes, you're out was like the big thing in California. And some of them were set up for life sentences that were finally commuted. So I guess I say all this because I feel like justice doesn't always need to play out as retribution, that maybe we should be looking more towards community building justice, social justice, right? Like how do we set up communities that are healthy so that people don't feel like their only family is a gang, or aren't surviving so much on starvation wages that they need to rob somebody so they can put food on the table, right? And so this is the sort of justice that I'd like for us to look at, language justice. But beyond that, with BLM and Stop Asian Hate, I'm hoping that they, and I it's not a monolith, right? Stop Asian Hate. But I have felt like very with this burgeoning movement, because I do feel there are moments where it feels anti-Black to me, where I see slogans like "Love us like you love our food," which is very catchy, but I don't want you to love me like just because you like the way you love a 2-item Panda Express combo. I just don't want you. I want you to dismantle white supremacy with me and not kill me in the street, right? Like I feel like that slogan is a little pandering. I've seen Asian lives matter and all lives matter signs, which is something that white supremacists that were undermining Black Lives Matter would say. And I know that the folks who are holding those signs aren't maybe informed of that, but I do feel like the way we find our liberation is by connecting to other social justice movements that are already out there and recognizing we are not free until everyone is free. This is not just about, when we're screaming stop Asian hate, I don't know if everyone in the crowd gets that we're not just screaming like don't kill us, but we're really calling to dismantle white supremacy, racist laws, things that have set up everything from slaves, like slaves are now going to be 3/5 a human, to Chinese people can't buy property, right? Like we need to check all of this and stop all of this. So to me, that's what the real justice is.
It sounds like you're participating in the communications process by being on the neighborhood council or being part.
Yes. Oh yeah.
What does that neighborhood council look like?
So yes, what we're witnessing now is we had a neighbor. This is a community-based organization which came together after the LA uprisings, asked us for funds, and we pushed back because basically they wanted funds for a brochure that said that would be in Korean, Chinese, and Bengali, and it was to raise awareness that there were hate crimes, and this is how you scream for help phonetically in Korean if you're being attacked, and make sure you call the police if this happens. But there's also a huge community mistrust of the police. Sometimes the police don't do anything. They just make a file and like they're like, come back when you have a black eye or you're dead, right? Like it's a thing that only can deal with it until after the fact. So so we were pushing back, like instead of funding something like this, can we fund bystander training, or can we help this organization with funds that would help build community, not just pass out brochures that make everyone panic. We ended up funding, which was a really mixed vote. They wanted funding for whistles, what I would term rape whistles, right? Which is a tool, but it's like, we need to get at the root at this, not just find things that like help alert people that we're being assaulted. And that's what the bigger thinking is around what are the injustices that are causing us causing people to not see us as human, or to think that we're easy punching bags, or to blame us for the virus. So who are the people in power who have put out there that that we are synonymous with a virus, that when we show up to this country, we take all the resources and we leave Black and brown communities behind, right? Like how can we dispel that sort of thinking around the model minority myth?
So those are great. Maybe George, you have some thoughts on what strategies work for?
Yeah, I think at least we can draw inspiration again from the Tyrus's painting of Confucius, in the sense that like I was saying before, be the pebble that drops into the lake, and your power and your influence will spread. But I think that before. I've lived in Los Angeles long enough, and many of you have lived here longer than I have, to have seen times when there have been crisis, and then after the crisis, like for instance, there was during the Vietnam War movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement and the civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s, you had a coming together of groups of color who united around civil rights issues. After the LA riots, again, that was probably one of the worst situations ever to befall LA. But after that, you saw a flourishing of lots of multicultural organizations and people who wanted to really just say, look, we can't go through that again. So building a lot of organizations and carrying that social justice to the next level. But I find that over time, sometimes people start losing some steam, and some of the organizations that get built kind of start losing a little bit of steam, or people just start getting tired, or people just start kind of losing their way and start getting not focusing on the things that we have in common, and the struggles that we all need to help each other with through. But with each one of these crises, and most recently with the anti-Asian violence, it's obviously it's a horrible situation, but the weird silver lining that comes out of it is I'm seeing spontaneous eruptions of Asian Americans once again inspired by activism, wanting to do something and getting together with their groups, whether it's groups of artists, groups of people who are in politics, people in civil rights, people who are in social services, just getting together. And I see people, you know, doing Zoom meetings or in person or whatever. And so in a weird way, you know, as we all know, I'm sure we've seen this in some fortune cookie, like the Chinese word for crisis is danger and opportunity, right? So there are dangers there. The opportunity exists. And this is a moment, I think, that we can all take it, you know, really just get on board with. And finally, I think a lot of Asian Americans, you know, we've long said that, you know, the model minority myth is a pernicious thing, right? Well, I think some Asian Americans were quite buying into that model minority idea. Well, if I go to send my kids to professional school, I do this, I do that, we'll be fine. Well, guess what? They still hate us. The people who hate us still hate us, and you're not going to be fine. And guess what? The people who hate you as an Asian person also hate Latinos and also hate African Americans. And we have things in common, and we need to work together.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of dialogue is still needed here. And speaking of dialogue, I should really mention, I asked all of you to take a look at Sonia's write-up in the virtual exhibition. It really, you know, you might think that she's soft-spoken, but I think that there's really a lot of cogent discussion there about the relationship between Tyrus and Y.C. Hong. So they were pioneers, both in their own way. Y.C. Was the first Chinese American lawyer in LA. He passed the state bar before he even finished law school. You know, that's a hero in my mind.
Yeah.
Tyrus, you know, going to work at Walt Disney at the Disney company and being, you know, advancing from just working as an in-betweener to having being recognized for his talents and being given more responsible work. And ultimately, as we heard last month in our Historical Society's program, he became a successful greeting card artist too. And later, of course, he was a kite flyer. You know, he was really always thinking of ways to expand his art, or to share his ideas and his vision. So these are two individuals who have left an amazing legacy. So we really, I invite you to all take a look at Sonia's exhibition. I should say Sonia and Shervin's exhibition. You're a team, I should always mention. And really enjoy, you know, what has been created by a team of individuals. Anyway, again, I thank the Louis Family Foundation for their support of the project. I should mention that the China Society of Southern California has always been a community sponsor for our programs, and I thank them. I thank all of you who have joined in our discussion and joined in the program tonight. You know, I see you out there, Sarah, and I see you, Terrence, and Tom McDonald, who is a past president of the Historical Society. There's a lot of friends. I wish we could all get together and go out and eat afterwards, you know, which is something that we always had fun doing. You know, we'd often have a couple of tables at a local restaurant, and maybe we'll be able to do that again soon. So I think we will sign off. I thank you all for joining in the May program of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. I don't have an announcement yet for the June program, but it will be on our website, chssc.org. So please feel free to join us again. Thank you all very much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sonia. See you, George.
Thank you. This
Bye.
was fun. Bye all.
Bye-bye.